Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Carrie Oderman with UATV. The European Court of Human Rights obliged Ukraine to pay compensations to 5 former officials dismissed under the government lustration law due to the violation of their rights in the country. The court also stated that the law on government cleansing differs from lustration laws adopted in other European countries. To discuss this, we're joined in the studio today by Vitalia Lebid, a lawyer at the Strategic Litigation Center of the Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Lustration is an interesting word, and we talk about it a lot in Ukraine. Our viewers might not be familiar with it. Lustration is basically from the Latin cleansing, and it means getting rid of old civil servants, old politicians, when there's a major change in government. This happened throughout Eastern Europe in the early 1990s, and after the revolution in 2014, it happened again in Ukraine. There are some differences, though, how it was done in Ukraine and how it was done in other European countries. And the devil is in the details. These differences were the basis for the claim of the 5 civil servants that just went up to the European Court of Justice. Where were the differences in the law?
Well, let's start with the concept of lustration in the law. So, actually, lustration is a process of cleansing in the government sphere during the transitional process in the state. So, and usually this transition process connected to the transition from, for example, totalitarian regime to democratic, some changes. And as you mentioned, that in most European countries, on the East European and Central European countries, it was made such lustration measures after the communistation, of the falling of the communistation regime. In Ukraine, we have lustration process only after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, and the special law was adopted. It was called on the cleansing of the authority in Ukraine, and actually, in this law was decided a certain categories of civil servants who fall to the application of this law, and according to this law, all the servants who took post at least during 1 year, during the period from 2010 till the February 2014, and actually this is a period of the Yanukovych presidency, and they should dismiss from their post. Also, there are some other categories of the servants, namely those servants who find guilty on the corruption offenses, and those civil servants who denied to go through such testing by the Lustration Committee. And as a result of this process, in Ukraine were dismissed 914 civil servants. And this information is published on the special register of the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine, and according to the data as of today, the number of civil servants is such. So, and actually after such lustration process, some of civil servants applied to the administrative court and raised the issue whether it was legal to dismiss them under this law. So now we have the issue in the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. Actually, immediately after the adoption of this law, the Supreme Court of Ukraine and People's Deputies of Ukraine lodged a submission to the Constitutional Court of Ukraine and asked to define whether such provision in the law of cleansing are constitutional. So, National Court in the individual cases in administrative courts decided to suspend the consideration of these cases until the final decision of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. And what we have today, recently the European Court of Human Rights make decision that actually the provision of the lustration law violate rights, actually rights to fair trial due to the last very long period of the consideration of the cases at national level. And the second violation is the violation of the right to respect private life, because actually some working issues are closely related to the personal issue of individual. And actually, in this part, European Court provides very clear and very detailed assessment of the provision of the lustration law in Ukraine. And the European Court came to the conclusion that actually it wasn't in accordance with the international standards and within the practice of the European Court of Human Rights. Because European Court have several cases under its consideration before it, according to the lustration process in other countries. And it decided that the main principles of the lustration process is that it cannot be as punishment or revenge. So actually, while considering the case in Ukraine, the European Court came to the conclusion so that it was, how to say, like automatically doing with the cases of each servant who fall under the provision of this law, because there wasn't any individual consideration of the case and whether that individual violate any provision of national law that lead to the violation to the rule of law of human rights. So actually, based on the mere fact that the certain individual took post during the year from the period from 2010 to 2014. So, and as a result was like automatic result that this person should dismiss from its post.
Okay, so let's put this into context. You said there was over 900 civil servants that were released. How large was the civil service at this time in Ukraine? Which percentage of people were released under the lustration?
Actually, it's hard to say.
Is it a smaller percentage, or was it a large portion of the civil service?
You know, not every civil servants fall under the provision of this law. Or only certain types of the high-ranking civil servants and those who work at the, for example, military serving and in the enforcement officials who deal with the, for example, violation of the human rights during the Revolution of Dignity. So not all the civil servants fall for this provision of the illustration. So it's difficult for me to say about how to compare 900 to the whole number of civil servants in Ukraine. So I haven't such information.
That's no problem. To put it into a different context, there was a certain rank of civil servants that were released under the lustration. The European Court of Justice said this wasn't okay. Has this hurt the functioning of Ukraine's civil servant? Are people less likely to work in civil service in Ukraine for fear of another lustration process to happen? Has this damaged people's civil service careers at all?
Well, actually, I'm not sure whether they are happy or not, but actually the result is that if most of the person who were dismissed from their post lodge application to the national court, so it's look like they are not agree with that and they want to back to their post offices because it was illegal and it was unfair to apply this provision to them only because then they was at this post from only 1 year during the presidency of Mr. Yanukovych.
The new administration is very keen on the lustration process, but there's been a juxtaposition. President Zelensky's own head of administration does not qualify to work under the lustration process. How is this reflected on the law's effectiveness domestically and internationally?
Well, actually, yes, Mr. Bogdan, who is the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, according to the provision of the law on lustration of Ukraine, should go through the lustration checking, and taking into account that he took a post during if I'm not mistaken, more than a year during the Yanukovych presidency. So it looks like he should be dismissed from this post, but actually he wasn't going through this illustration process, and as far as I know, it was the position of the President of Ukraine. So, and it looks like there are two standards, two different servants due after the changing of the power in Ukraine. But actually, after the decision of European Court, I think the Constitutional Court of Ukraine will also decide that this law violates the rights of the civil servants and will be defined unconstitutional. And actually the result will be that civil servants who were dismissed from their post at that period will have a chance to reinstatement.
This is a very interesting topic, and international law is very important to Ukraine. A lot of other problems are based on people following international law, dealing with foreign policy of Ukraine. We'd love to have you back. Unfortunately, we ran out of time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Vitalia Lebid, a lawyer at the Strategic Litigation Center of the Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.